Okay, guys, what's the #1 email I've been getting in my inbox recently? Lots of stuff I've been giving you. Tough call? Actually, it's not so tough a call. Everybody's been asking me, what are my thoughts on the Popori? So, satisfying that demand today with my initial thoughts. Stay tuned. Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. Got so much stuff to get out to you, and I've been giving you stuff. I still have stuff to give you from that dealership, AV Luxury Group in Vegas, the Burmester system. You're going to love that. And especially, I think a lot of people are enjoying the music clips that I've found playing on those systems. Also, music clips from the music room. That was a phenomenal tour if you didn't watch that. But I got music clips from their reference room still. And also, the formal walkthrough tour of YG, which blows me away. This is a maker that does things right, especially when you're talking about point source box speakers. And I still have all that stuff to get you, but because I've been getting a lot of requests, and it kind of parlays into what we were talking about with YG. They're doing things at the nth level of point source box speakers. And I like to showcase that using technology, actives, building everything in-house, tolerances of parts, building their parts themselves, anodizing. If you're going to make a point source box speaker and you're going to have a checklist of which company is best, it's going to be hard pressed. You're going to be hard pressed to find any company to beat YG on that checklist. And then, as you heard from Matthew Webster in my recent interview, it's going to be hard pressed to beat them on subjective and emotional attachments because they spend so much time studying that. And that's what I like to associate the hobby with. Edgar, PhD, Princeton, all the studies they do. Same thing, Dr. Matthew Webster at YG. These are people truly advancing the hobby. And to that ilk, it brings up the Poporis. This is a speaker that, I mean, I have not been in the market for a speaker for many years. I've been very happy with my GR Research NXtremes, and I can afford, luckily, what I want within reason. But I do have to worry about space and other things. And value has always been a part of my equation, regardless how much money I make. And the GR Research NXtremes have been phenomenal. So I haven't felt the itch to change. However, let me walk you through why I become a fan of these, how I became a fan in case you're new to this. I sometimes treat my channel like an episodic series and assume you know. So real quick, let me tell you, although let me not keep you in suspense. First of all, I'll tell you right off the bat, phenomenal. They definitely are my favorite over the GR Research NXtremes, but more importantly, far better than any other electrostatic I've heard, and even point source boxes that shows. This provides the level of enjoyment and presentation that I value and enjoy, but anybody can just put a camera in front of their face, call themselves an expert, and give you subjective jargon. What I want to do, although I've gone a little bit further than that, guys, I've shown you measurements in my room at my listening position in my ear. I've shown you other people's. I've shown you blind tests I've taken, but still, you don't have to take my word for it. Actually, I've done a demo yesterday. People came Sunday. Got a demo coming out here Friday. If you want to come down, hear it for yourself, you can. But what I wanted to do, if you don't have that opportunity, also in Tampa, you can come to Tampa. It's going to be not the WR2s. These are staying here. They're going to go to my friend Doug. He's buying these. But the WR3s, the model below, and the model above, WR1, are going to be in Tampa at the Unique Home Audio Room. Mike Sweck is the distributor dealer. You can go check that out. I'll be helping him run the room as well because he's using Bach. But anyway, that's another chance to hear it. But if you don't have any other opportunity, you want to just get my feedback, that's what I wanted to do today and walk you through why my subjective opinions. Like I said, anybody can have a subjective opinion, but I want to break down for you why this type of speaker is my favorite, what things I value. And then at some point you may find that, okay, yeah, I feel that same way. I'm on that same path as you. Or you may say, well, I'm at this point, I like the YG box speakers and that's my taste profile. And there's arguments to be made for all of these different ilks. It's about finding the company doing it right with these different ilk speakers. And today I'm going to help break down for you why I prefer this type of line source open baffle speaker. And then you may be able to feel whether that's a taste profile for you. But backing up a little bit, how did I get even involved with this? Well, 2-3 years ago, I heard the Poporis at Seattle Audio Fest. Actually, Dr. Vinyl dragged me into the room. I probably wouldn't even gone in the room, or maybe just casually. I had just come out of, here was something I did remember from that visit, which is very hard with all the rooms I visit for me to remember certain things. I remember being in the Acora room and listening to the VRC1s. Val's amazing, cost no object speaker, very dynamic. He was playing, I think, Ratchet at the time, or maybe it was Ghost Rider. One of those two at ear bleeding levels, super dynamic. I have the video on my channel. You can watch that. But as I came out, Dr. Vinyl grabbed me and said, you got to come hear these electrostatics. He's been a fan of electrostatics. He's a Sound Lab dealer, I think, still to this day himself. Actually, Mike Sweck, who is doing the demo at Tampa, he's a Sound Lab dealer too, but he prefers these now. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but this is about my impressions. Dr. Vinyl brought me into that room, and coincidentally, I didn't request the song. They played the same song I had just heard in the Acora room. Super dynamic, super loud. Not quite to the SPLs. We didn't go crazy, and it was a much smaller room. But I was like, wow, very rarely do I have an electrostatic speaker maker voluntarily play this kind of track, because usually the Excursion brings them to their knees and it slaps. And I've seen that firsthand when I've demoed other electrostatic speakers this past year, trying to find one that I really liked. But this one passed with flying colors back a few years ago. Now, I didn't see them at any shows. I kind of lost touch with them. However, Mike Sweck, who is a Sound Lab dealer, as I mentioned, he was looking for another line. He loves electrostatics like most people do. I fell in love with them. The original Sound Lab A1 in the 90s. I was like, this is what sound should sound like. It radiates the sound from a whole panel, just the realism and the open baffle nature without the cabinet colorations, ports, all these things that are much more difficult to manage. And companies like YG manage it at the best levels. So now there's a new standard in that ilk. But certainly at the time, there was nothing even that came close to a Sound Lab A1 on certain metrics. Now, you had to have a big room, you had to have lots of amplification, and still the bass may not be as dynamic as traditional speakers. So, but I kept in my mind, that is the type of speaker wish list I would always want. But the problems were big size, need lots of power, and the bass performance was lacking. There are some hybrids out there. Martin Logan, I heard a few hybrids that I liked. The Martin Logan Prodigy was good. And then I was sold by the dealer at the time, oh, they trickle everything down. Just get the scenario of the Arius. It's the same as the Prodigy. No, guys, that was when I was much more primitive in my understanding and stuff. I had that speaker, and hybrids are not for me at all. One of the things you don't want to do is put a box in something, a pistonic driver in electrostatics or planars. These are very light drivers, very precise, very fast. It's kind of funny when you listen to some pistonic drivers, how they tout how light their drivers are and how accurate and how linear they are. Well, this is the size of a human hair thickness, and the speed and it doesn't have the velocity and the inertia that has to be stopped and started. This is so far superior in many metrics of a driver technology to do everything than a lot of pistonic drivers that try to tout the same things on certain metrics. So in any case, you don't want to put a pistonic driver, though, in the same cabinet as this, because guess what that cabinet is? The whole reason you have these, number one, is not to have a cabinet, but those cabinet now is going to contain that back wave of the driver, even if you port it, and it's going to add vibrations to those very sensitive drivers. And on top of that, there's an even bigger problem. A lot of those, especially the Martin Logan scenarios and Ariuses, they didn't have a driver, bass driver at the bottom that could go low, that would take over the panels itself. Didn't go low enough for the bass driver to truly do sub-frequencies. If you look at a lot of these hybrids, the bass driver actually crosses over 100 hertz, sometimes over 200 hertz, which is a big no-no for me. Why is that? Well, on top of the things I mentioned about the vibrations, the cabinet, all these things, you also have locatable frequencies. If you start getting over 100 hertz, your ears can locate where that's coming from. So if the driver on the floor is producing, and this is moving a lot different than these drivers, producing the same frequencies as the panels up here at locatable frequencies. Guess what your ears locate that sound to be? Lower. And then you end up thinking that you're listening to midgets. Now, on certain material, when the low bass isn't playing, you'll notice that the soundstage goes up. And how did I find out this real time, prove it to myself? Yeah, it's provable in science and all this measurements. It's clear. It's not arguable. Now, you may not, let me just make this clear. You may not care about that changing of the soundstage. Totally fine. Edgar has Sanders speakers as his reference. They go pretty low, down to 170 hertz, but he will acknowledge the issue that I'm talking about is a real issue. But it's just a trade-off that some people, taste profile, care about, don't care about. I care about it a lot because I have Wisdom audio speakers in my main room that have a planar top and then two huge bass drivers at the bottom. The reason they're huge, 90-pound drivers each, just the drivers, is that they basically operate as subs. And more importantly, they're actively crossed over. So dedicated amps for those subs, and I can control what point those subs take over. So when I dial in my Wisdoms, they always are not playing anything much over 100 hertz. So then when the bass is playing by those drivers, I'm not locating the soundstage come down. Now I can move the dial on my Wisdom audio crossover, and guess what will happen when I'm playing music? I can show real time the soundstage comes down because now I'm letting the bass driver at the bottom, this hybrid, play more of the frequencies that the planar is playing in my Wisdoms, and guess what happens? Soundstage creeps down. Again, you may not care about that. I care about it. And it's a problem for me. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of why you get these. That's why Maggie's, they put all the effort into the planar and other like Final Electrostatics and Sound Labs. They do as much as they can with the panel covering the frequency range. And you can add subs, and there's an advantage to doing subs versus hybrids. Number one, you take the vibrations of that sub cabinet out of impacting your open baffle light drivers in electrostatics, or in the case of my Wisdoms, a planar. But there's another benefit. When you launch bass symmetrically in the room with two bass drivers symmetrically in the room, guess what you do? You basically create the same effect of water in a wave pool. They're symmetrically sending it this way, and then the back wave comes out, and then you create dips and peaks. And if your sitting position is in a dip or a peak at certain frequencies, you could be at a dip at one frequency, a peak at another one. Very problematic with symmetrical loading bass. So bass really should be, in my opinion, for optimal performance at your listening position, should be in a sub, separate cabinet, and then you can put maybe a swarm of subs to launch bass from different angles and areas in your room to offset those severe dips and peaks caused by symmetrical loading of the room. But that's getting into much more sub setup stuff that I've covered with JR in the past and may cover in the future. But it's a reason why having all one panel, no bass driver, nothing impacting this is very important. But how does this speaker get low enough, though, that if you do use subs, you're not having to go over 100 hertz and whatnot, or need subs at all? In this case, I get down to 30 hertz in my room at my listening position with these speakers. For most material, there isn't even much material you play that's got 20 hertz. But I do have subs, and I can roll them off and do whatever I want, but you really don't need them with this. And why is that? Well, I'm going to do a Zoom with the manufacturers of Popori to kind of see what they will disclose as part of their secret sauce. But one of the things that was brilliant, I will share with you about the Poporis, that cured a lot of problems that not only plague electrostatics, it plagues point source box speakers too, especially ported ones. What happens is when you get down low, super low in the bass, if you don't roll off your drivers, it's going to try to produce whatever you give it. You'll see this with rumble filters, that people don't use a rumble filter on their turntable. There's some resonance coming back into the cartridge, and you'll see the drivers of the speaker moving like crazy, but the music you're hearing, there's no bass playing. Why is that driver going crazy? Well, it's trying to play infrasonic material, stuff that you can't even hear. But your gear hears it, your gear knows about it, a mic could pick it up, but you can't hear it, and it's trying to play that. The old saying is, if you see your driver moving, especially a lot, it's distorting. And at a minimum, it's taking a lot of power from your amplifier. So you do not want your drivers, even Pistonic drivers, doing this, okay? It may do it, and the port may give you some that fake bass, I call it, extra extension and oomph, and people like it. Again, whatever people like, they like. I'm not here to criticize people that may like, ketchup on their steak or whatever. I'm just talking about things that are inarguable in general, and very rarely can people offset these issues. There are always going to be exceptions, so I'm not here to argue the exceptions. But in any case, this driver moving a lot is something you don't want. Well, in this case, it's even more imperative with a electrostatic. The amount of excursion is much lower with electrostatics. So what they are able to do, and I haven't really figured out how they're doing it mechanically, electronically, whatever, they make sure the driver is never going past its level of excursion that it's comfortable with. So yes, it'll roll off, but it'll be rolled off very steeply around 30 hertz and give you higher quality of all the bass above that, because it's not trying to also do all these things that we can't hear, make ridiculous excursions, slap against the panel. This is part of the brilliance of that design that they figured out, because Popori used to always, or they still do today, repair other people's electrostatics. That's where they learned the trade-offs, the issues, the reliability, all the things that they solved with their speaker were based on learning firsthand in the trenches with other designs of this ilk. And so that's what's so impressive, and that's why in Capital Audiophile, we didn't just do it for fun to put the SPL meter and then bring subs and no subs to show that these speakers can play over 100 hertz, low bass material, ratchet, Ghost Rider. Somebody asked for Queen Mary. They said, oh, this is going to blow up any speaker, even Pistonic speakers, if you crank it up. We played it. I don't know if I had it on camera, but Mike Sweck and others in the room at the time will tell you it was no problem. And we also played it with the sub and without the sub, and people said, not even necessary, okay? But subs, I think, I'm running it with subs because what subs still will allow you to do is that issue I talked about with the wave pool. Every room is going to have issues under 200 hertz. You can't escape it. So what you're going to want to do is look at where your peaks and dips are. And if maybe 60 hertz you have a dip, you can actually put your sub and your crossover point at 60 hertz. And oftentimes, because now you're loading bass from a different area of the room and some amplitude coming from that area, now that peak is no longer, and dip is no longer as bad, because now you've got bass coming right at that frequency in from a different location. And it's just like, that's why the swarm works so good too, because you're loading it from around the room. Imagine a wave pool where it wasn't just all loading from the front, it's loading from all around. It helps even out those deep waves. So I'm getting off on topics that are maybe too detailed, too complex, but I think it's important for you to understand my evolution of what I value and why I do what I do. I put these and I still use subs. I can play them like I did for the gentleman that came demo without subs. He loved them without subs. He's placing an order for these exact models, just the red version. These are going to benchmark as good as any speaker against any type of speaker. Horns, they have their own issues, especially with size and shouty nature and stuff like that. And a lot of horns aren't even true horns. You have to spend a lot of money to get horns right. But point source box speakers, you've seen how YG, all the stuff they have to go through to get it right. And certainly if I'm buying a point source box speaker, I'm buying a YG with only a few other potential considerations, because what they do is address all the issues that point source box speakers have. And there are still some advantages to a point source box speaker. In certain rooms, these speakers will require potentially more DSP, especially if you are putting them in a small room like this and you don't have a lot of back wall treatment. They're radiating sound back and forth more than a normal point source box. So your measurements at your listening position may be better with a point source box speaker. Now, in most cases, that most of these box speakers, unless you're dealing with a YG or very well made ones like a GR Research, they're not really behaving like a point source anyway. So you've got comb filtering and you've got different drivers. I'll even put up real quick a frequency response, and I want you to just take a look at it real quick and say, knee jerk, you may look at it and say, wow, how did they get a three-way speaker to measure flat all the way across like that? That's amazing. Here's a case where you need to understand diagnosing the measurements, understanding the measurements, and how limited information just one measurement data point gives you versus, and even understanding that graph. When I see a flat frequency response, that's awesome, great, very deserve kudos. But what I also look at is how much of those drivers overlapping below that point. Because let me jump into my chair and show you on the GR Research, because it'll show you why some point source box speakers, if you decide to go that route, I want to go ahead and make this comprehensive. And okay, guys, here's my GR Research NXtremes. If you've been a frequent visitor to my channel, you know these have been in my backdrop forever, and with deservingly so, because they are phenomenal speakers. And one of the key things that I haven't really mentioned yet is cost and price. I mean, the WR2s from Popori are $34,000. The next model down, the cheapest model, is $17,000. So yeah, it should be much better. But I want to showcase one of the things just in general, point source box speakers, some of the things that I look for that even at hundreds of $1,000s of price tags with speakers that are Pistonic drivers in a cabinet, sometimes are problematic. Now, what's amazing is that Danny does a great job at a low budget point of mitigating a lot of these factors. But here's what I wanted to show you. I was showing you a simulated actual crossover, a three-way crossover, where things were quite flat. But when I look at it, I look at how much of those drivers rolling, actually playing over each other. Sometimes it's a steep crossover point, sometimes it's a shallow crossover point. In my general impressions, I do not like sounds coming from multiple drivers at the same time overlapping a lot. There can be some advantages in terms of phase behavior and that flat frequency response. It's all a very complex equation. So I don't want to simplify this or make it too general. But just imagine, guys, this driver here, this is a planar, and then this is a Pistonic driver of different quality of even these 6-inch drivers here. What are the odds if they all at some point overlap, or at least two of them overlap at the same time? What are the odds of them playing identically, sounding the same? What is the odds as well of them reaching your ear? They're coming from different parts in the cabinet, different distances. What is the time alignment aspect? Now, that's part of the science that people like YG, Danny Ritchie do extremely well. And so at a modest budget, with these type of drivers, this type of speaker, whether it's open baffle, or in my case, I also like sealed box cabinets like YG, you can get tremendous performance with minimal downsides. But the reality is still there. You have, and then Danny himself has to fix tons of speakers that try similar designs, Pistonic driver designs in a box, and they can't get it right, or they have lots of flaws. This is a case where if you can find the right designer doing a Pistonic driver right, that's great. But there's a minefield of things. Just here, a mid-range tweeter mid-range. Let's think about this for a second. Because actually, I talked to Alon at Magico about this. He mentioned to me he doesn't do MTM, and it has lots of problematic things itself that you have to navigate, because you have to worry about comb filtering and lobing when you have two drivers so close playing the same things. Well, actually, the fact that they're close is actually better in a lot of respects. That's why Danny keeps them really close to the tweeter, so that they simulate acting like a true point source. We talk about these speakers being a point source, but almost none of them behave that way. And then also the diffraction from this tweeter around the baffle and this one around the baffle, these are all very much minefield variables that you have to judge, versus with a Popori electrostatic, just one driver launching it in a line source way. Again, those have trade-offs too, but I'm just showcasing why In a lot of cases, it's very evident early on when you listen to electrostatic, because in the mid-range and tweeter, where you often have several drivers crossing over passive parts and that time alignment's not there, that's where a Popori and other electrostatics as well really can shine. And even if you want to say what is the most wanted vintage speaker out there, it's probably a quad, which is an electrostatic, and it was known for its beautiful mid-range, because ever since then, we've been accustomed to pistonic drivers, melding, crossover parts, passive parts, and that is, if I wanted to get into the subjective talk about the differences right off the bat, I'll do a future video with music clips and more subjective talk, but that is where the magic is with electrostatics. And what I talked about, bass performance, is now not the trade-off with electrostatics like a Popori that it was before. Now, still, when you talk about, actually, this speaker, bass performance-wise, there's 16 of these 6-inch drivers. And you would think, pistonic drivers, 16 of them, it can move a lot of air. Well, that can be, because it's an open baffle, and it's only 6-inch drivers, this actually, in my room, has a higher roll-off point in my room than the Poporis. The Poporis easily get to close to 35 to 30 hertz before it starts significantly rolling off. These were starting to roll off 70, 60 hertz at my listening position. Everything stayed the same gear, everything. So, and that's why Danny recommends these be run with subs, and I highly recommend it as well. It's meant to be done like that. So again, every speaker has trade-offs, and low bass is commonly the problem with every speaker, especially ported speakers. I kind of touched on this a minute ago, but a ported speaker is kind of giving you a little bit of fake bass. It's giving you that tuned frequency where it gives you a little oomph and can be done really well, but it can also be done poorly. You can hear the chuffing. You can sense the chuffing, the sound. And then every frequency below that port frequency, guess what? It's going to be compromised. This is just stuff that is commonly part of the trade-offs, like MTM, the cabinet construction. This is MDF. Perfectly fine for this budget point for sure. But doing aluminum, doing the fabrication, having millions of dollars of CNC machines, that's another equation that if you want to go to the nth degree, you have to do to control all the variables. With a cabinetless, like an electrostatic, it saves you a lot of your cost in buying it is not in a cabinet. It's in the technology and other things. So, and you can get $100,000 performance for $30,000 versus a cabinet that they have to CNC out of aluminum and have all these expensive machines. All that has to be recouped in the price. So the budget is part of the equation. Variables, trade-offs, who's designing what speaker is more important than the type of speaker. And that's why at a budget point like this, I've been a big fan of these speakers, and these still may be the perfect speaker for you and your budget and your performance demands with a sub and mitigating things. And again, something like the Bach can help almost any speaker, even bookshelf speakers. But I am a little bit somewhat amused by some of these speakers that people tout as world beating, and they have one little driver, their bookshelf. They don't sell them with subs. They don't talk about subs. It's just any speaker that is not truly full range, and this has 16 of these 6-inch drivers, okay? So any speaker that is not full range, at least to like 40 hertz, that most material doesn't go below 40 hertz, but you can sense stuff all the way to 20 hertz. But if you don't get to 40 hertz with these little small box speakers and you can't play at high SPLs with them, I'm sorry, guys, it's never going to sound real to you, because it's missing so much of that critical low bass information that our ears can hear in real life. And a lot of cases, it's better to err on a big speaker that can produce those low frequencies and then leverage room treatments and DSP to correct for other things, time alignment, frequency stuff. I tell people it's better to sacrifice getting at least a full range speaker than a super highly designed monitor that is compromised in the low frequencies. I don't see anybody long term ever staying pat with small monitors that aren't full range, because over time you're going to play some material that isn't going to allow you to enjoy and feel that realism if you're missing some of the frequencies. And that's been one of the major trade-offs with electrostatics that haven't been hybrids. We talked about the problems with hybrids, but the problems with Maggies and others, if you don't have full range, people can find them over time to be fatiguing and not truly realistic. The Poporis now get low enough where you can even get lower than these speakers. You can perform without subs with them, but if you want to add subs and ideally address any room issues, the performance level is off the hook. Now, would I still recommend YGs for point source box speakers for a lot of people? Absolutely, because certain rooms aren't going to be conducive to being able to pull it out enough for electrostatic. And when you can have everything controlled like YG has to behave like a true point source, you might need less EQ at your listening position. It is, yes, it's going to be a little more shouty and have diffraction issues different than a line source, but a lot of people do like that. That's why you want to A/B and test it. And at the listening position on certain metrics, you may get away with better frequency response with a point source that does not just spray the sound around or have that back wave like an electrostatic does. So there are trade-offs no matter what. There's no perfect speaker out there. There's no perfect design. There's no perfect designer. It's going to be ones that fit your taste profile. And hopefully this video helped you more than just tell you about subjective jargon about the Poporis. And I'll have music clips and more on that kind of stuff, but gives you a little bit more insight as to why that type of speaker has so many advantages to me as my quote, holy grail, and Popori has delivered on fixing some of the major things that have kept me from ever owning one again after I've tried hybrids and other things in the past. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you back here soon with a lot more.